Um, Hello, everyone. We are back in our Social Ledger version 2 discussion. So today we want to talk a little bit about gamification and revisiting the slide deck we put together and see what the next steps are for the Social Ledger. Let's spend a few minutes again on gamification, and to put it into some more context here. Gary just started to elucidate that. To me, I see there are two branches here. One is the typical PBL aspect of gamifications, which is points, boards or badges and these leaderboards where you rank people. You on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's one typical aspect of gamifications that I don't see as it's something I'm critical towards. I don't like that aspect because it leads towards competitive thinking. It leads towards you collect the badges. It leads towards cheating the system and trying to collect points in any way possible, right? To get a promotion, to get a raise, whatever it is, right? I'm not looking at that aspect of gamification. Here, I'm looking much more into what I call the work is play is learning, is the game itself. I'll give you one example here. I've done a lot of work with method cards, right? So you could say, is a method card a game, right? Or is it gamification of something, right? To me, it's another tool here that's very playful, right? Oh, sorry, again, wrong direction. It's very playful. So you grab a card, you throw it into a conversation, and you gain some insights, and you can even say what level the card is, and what relationships and connections it has to other cards. So this whole aspect of cards. So the card, intrinsically, the card itself is a game, right? So you play that, put it on the table, and others are picking it up and do something with it. So to me, that's the notion of gamification I want to see with the social ledger. Not going into the PBL discussion or what John alluded to earlier, how it's used now in Agile, where people are really in a highly competitive situation, where they can't break out of it anymore, because it's even coming from, as you said, John, from the top down. It's managers who drive this forward and see it another way to increase performance, right, of their teams, and to increase the output they so desire. Okay, you want to give it to John? So again, maybe some other thoughts you have on your perspective.
All I can do is really enforce that piece that I understand. It's where it's being used in development teams, software development teams, or IT system projects. I think it encourages short-term thinking. It's often based around scenarios and people brainstorming. I think is a great way, but once you start to bring gameplay into it, I think it destroys it because it becomes competitive. You say game, it implies winners and losers. Otherwise, it's not a game. And I think also developers can become addicted to, or should I say obsessed? No, obsessed is the wrong word. They can divert their healthy attention towards gaining prizes or points or beating other members of the team, rather than focusing on the big picture of why they're there. Why should they write such test scripts, or why should they care about indexes on database? They only become engaged with a game that they go to every day to play. And that then applies only to a proportion of staff. It doesn't apply to everybody. Not everybody is competitive. And I would say I'm like that. I like to play games, but I'm not, it's not intrinsic to my nature to be competitive. I don't feel anyway. And I think once you do enter a situation where you are competitive, and it's not gameplay, it's serious, it's where you have to go and earn your money day in, day out. So you already have a lot of responsibilities there, no matter what job you've got, whether it's a software developer that you love. You're in this job because you absolutely love it, but it's spoilt by these ridiculous games that don't add any value. And that what I'm doing there is I'm reflecting back to you what I hear over the telephone to these anonymous people that I speak to. I know it's being recorded, but I won't say any more than that. And I genuinely believe when it's used in a situation for motivation's sake, not for creativity, but to motivate people, it's capitalism with a smile or a grin.
I think it would be worthwhile having the game be explicit or not explicit in terms of being able to turn it off, so to speak. But following rules is in a co-creation effort rather than the competitive effort is a very different thing. Okay, you're not it becomes what the team can accomplish rather than what the individual can accomplish. And as Gary was saying before, it really helps develop a collective intelligence. And I think that's because when everyone's following rules, they become the bees in the hive that allow it, that by having common behaviors allow the emergence of a collective being. I think it's something we should definitely try. Unfortunately, in a collaboration, nobody gets their way. We have to live with that. We all have different ideas on how the game should go, whether you call it a game or not. Like Gary was saying, it's already a game. We just don't call it that.
I don't know whether you remember, you were here when I said this. Possibly not. I've only said this to Joachim, but I know it does work in certain environments. That's the conflict I've got in a startup where everybody's absolutely motivated and they will do anything whatsoever to make the thing work. Yes, and probably with the collective here, it will work. But when we take the system and put it into a different collective, where it's people's full-time job, and they're playing this game in addition to all the other responsibilities, that's when I'm not so sure. And I think either the gamification should actually help people do their job and not make them feel miserable because they're always losing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we agree it's good. We agree it's good for some things.
Yes.
And not for others.
Yeah.
So let's go forward with the gamification, which people have the energy to do right now, and also go forward with the non-game interface or user experience, which maybe you want to lead, John. You're on mute.
It is. I mean, it is the non-game interface that we're looking at. But that's a good segue, Jim. To let's talk about our social ledger 2 here, right? That's where we're coming together and see where we are, because I have plenty of updates on that. So let me share my screen here and go to the slides. Everybody see the slides? Excellent. So I won't go over each one of them. So we already, I just want to, make sure we stop at some slides here if you have more questions, right? Or concerns or ideas how we should rephrase this and build on top of this. So I won't go over the prologue here. The starting points, how we do this and why we do this. The one thing I wanted to highlight again, to me, which is very important, is the gap between newcomers to the social ledger and people who have worked with the social ledger for a while. There is a gap, and we need to be conscious of closing this gap. You know, just like you mentioned, you're going to talk to Anders this week, Jim. There's a gap. You know, Anders doesn't see the full value, and so do other members, you know, of our collective. They don't see the full value of that. So there's this gap we have to overcome. And to me, this is a critical design aspect of the social ledger too, is to say you can dive into this without any prior knowledge of what this thing is. You know, just by virtue of exploring this thing, right? Reading, diving into these channels and seeing what conversations are happening in there, that's the enablement of the social ledger. That's what I want to focus on here. Okay, so we talked about some of these card-based interfaces. I added a few more examples, I think, to that. I think, John, you brought up one good company, which is minds.com, right? There's a link at the bottom here. That has also an interesting card-based interface with a few features and functions. Even I think currency plays a role in this card-based environment. So that was interesting. So let's skip over these and quick review of the current sort of card-based output that we have, which is our social object here, which contains some metadata, right? We can currently create new ones, read the stuff, and delete cards. And they contain a link, basically, to the content over on the tool side, right? Be that a link to goals, to an article, or be that a link to MailTrain, be that a link to you know, a post in Mattermost. That's the tool environment here, and that's where you see the object itself embedded in that tool, authenticated through the tool itself. So in that case, Mattermost, you know, will disallow you to follow this link if you're not authenticated in Mattermost. So that's the same here. I didn't change anything here. And here's the example, same as before, and some thinking on the future of the card, right? So the main difference here being that this is now bidirectional, right? Instead of going from here to here, we would extract some intelligence from the tool and the protocol and put it back into the social object, you know, the representation of it, the card, to take additional actions, meaning we're adding not only data, but also some behavior here. So there are some functions you could explicitly use on the social object. Okay, so nothing new here. And here is the social object as a history view. To me, you know, I've looked at this now for a while, and I do think it makes sense to preserve a historical view of the activities that were happening in a team environment. You know, if you see it as a chronological view here that says here's the latest event that happened, so you could go in here into a view like this and say, hey, there's a Zoom session that's actually in progress, that's on top of the card stack, meaning this is actually happening right now. And then you can go back in time and say, okay, so before that, they had meeting agendas, they had Zoom recordings, they had other Zoom sessions that were completed here, right, with a certain action around that. And you can go back and back and back in time and sort of almost follow back to the origins of that team. You know, what did they do at the very beginning? You know, you can see actually in this view to say, yes, they actually made some decisions using Lumio. You can go in there and see what kind of decision was made using the Lumio tool as a decision maker. You could go back and see, okay, they bookmarked some of the research, you know, some interesting articles they found on the internet. They bookmarked that. You can go into this tool and say, okay, what are the articles they gathered in this specific space? So to me, this is a very interesting view on someone who joins the team, say, and wants to go back and see what are the important milestones that they accomplished, right? Without going through miles and miles of conversations, right? We could do the same in Mattermost, where you just jump back in time and then go through all of the conversations that were happening. But that's exhausting to me, right? I'd rather see a view like this where I can see maybe only the documents. That's of interest to me. Let me filter this by documents. I want to see, a meeting agenda, a design document, a project outline. That's it. And maybe they came to some kind of decision. I want to see that too. So it's a very efficient filter for me to say, hey, I can now recap and understand what happened in the past here. So that's the historical view, right? This to me also is still relevant, because the other direction is how do you start all this, right? So coming from a historical view is it already had happened in the past, right? So there's some output that we created, and you can review that and retrieve it. But if you start from scratch, from the very beginning, what's the very first social object that you're creating here, right? The first conversations that you may have, the first document you put together, right? The first Zoom session, probably a Zoom session is a very early social object in the history of a group, right? So you create that first, and out of this come all of these other activities, right? And the history of the group. Okay, so that's all previous content. I do want to show you some new stuff I've been thinking through here, and maybe I'll stop for a moment. Any questions, issues, things you wanted to bring into this conversation?
Just to give a little context from my view, I mean, a social object has a name or a label, and it has a link, and it has state. And the state can include behavior, what you're allowed to do with it. And the social object has is a sort of persona of the thing that it points to. It's a context. It gives it puts the object in the context of an activity within a team, within a domain, within an organization, and our collective of organizations.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. John?
Would it be appropriate now to bring up this idea I have about aggregations? Yeah.
Sure. Tell us more. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's something that you skimmed over earlier when you said that I wouldn't like to troll through a long Mattermost conversation to understand the status of a project.
Right.
So I'm starting to make more sense now of social ledger and social objects, but I've still got a lot to learn. But when somebody says an object to me, it's something that you create an instance of that then has state, which can then be serialized back into a database and then deserialized to bring back to life. So the social objects that you've talked about, these cards that I can see on the screen, are the different tools or functions that could be part of a social ledger, but it's essentially a person's project or timeline. So I'll get to the point I'm trying to make now. Imagine if you could go back to this idea of Twitter does it. So if we were to start a project with everybody here, I would essentially follow you all, and I could see your activity that's related to a particular project. Now, I agree, over time, that timeline would become messy and very long and with lots of irrelevant conversations in there. But the things which are relevant are these various Zoom sessions, meeting agendas, etc., which state will change throughout the project. So if you can imagine one of these social objects, as you call them, changes state, it would automatically appear at the top of your timeline. So to say that, oops, this, so it's a bit like a bot, but I'm still using it's your terminology of a card or a social object. But I think the idea of having aggregated timelines on people's activity, it's something that you could then run full text search over, but you could also have many dimensions running at the same time. So I could have a timeline for social ledger, a timeline for one of the MVPs, a timeline for marketing, and they do marry up with the domain idea in Sociocracy.
Yes, very much so, John.
Yeah.
And I like that. And it's just okay.
I think the when functionality or event processing part of the social ledger addresses, at least in the primitive form, the along with the sorting and filtering of cards and you know, the perspective of a card in a context, what it's connected to, which is a holographic view of the structure, the holonic structure, where every card is a center of its own holon of interconnectivity.
Yep. And Jim, that's a good reflection. And to pick up on what you said, John, the way I see this is one interface of many, right? And this sort of a past tense interface. This is about the past, right? But there are other interfaces that are about the present, and then there are others that are about the future too. Sorry about this call here. Let it ring. And by present, I mean, you know, stuff like what we did with the holonic chart gives you a current view, current picture of the entire world, right? We're looking into, and you can zoom in, zoom out, see what's actually happening right now. And there's another aspect I want to dive in with the social ledger is the future. That means there can be cards that are suggested to you, to the team, of how do you move forward, right? Let's say, as an example, you have a team meeting and you get to know the people, and you never had a Zoom session, let's say, right? You never had a video conference. So we would go in and, or a bot, you know, bot to me is the same thing, you know, a bot or some when logic in there goes in there and says, hey, you guys should have a Zoom session. That would be good. That's like a good practice to have after, you know, a couple of days you got to know each other. And by the way, if you have a Zoom session, you might also have a meeting agenda. Here's a template for the meeting agenda that other teams have used in the past, and it's a pretty good protocol, right? So these kind of protocols that we suggest going forward are as critical to the social ledger to me as the historical perspective of, yes, that's been done, and people can trace that if they want to, and they can even reuse these cards, right? So I can go into a Zoom session that was completed here and instantiated it again, and it becomes, as you said, John, it becomes a new instance and jumps to the front of the queue because now it's something that's, say, in progress, right?
Yeah, and I should clarify one thing. You know, these are objects in that their behavior is totally general, but they're dynamic, and they gain behavior. They're not of a fixed class, and they follow formally an actor model, where the only thing we have is cards and messages between cards that go in mailboxes. Okay, so that people cards send and receive messages from other channels, which are cards. Okay, so you know, this is the formal model that would be adapted on Holochain and in Firebase with a multiple commit model for transactions and controlling processes and being able to orchestrate processes.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Let's move ahead. We have about 20 minutes left here, because I want to show you some of the visualizations of and how would an interface look like. Again, this is a card-based interface. There are other interfaces to the social ledger, but this is one that's easy to grasp, and for people with no prior knowledge, they can jump in here and immediately do something. So here's a new slide, what I call joining the collective. So this could be the top level cards you see as soon as you open it, as soon as you authenticate. Actually, let me go back to one more slide here. As soon as you authenticate yourself, so you will have an account in Social Ledger 2 that's based on some OAuth or other authentication mechanism, and an ID, ideally a distributed ID, so ID that's valid across all of the applications that you're going to use. So that's the first step. Second step, what I put here now is you create a wallet. So this could be a wallet. I'll have to explore Michael's Open Money API and see how can we interface with that. But it's a wallet that gives you keys, and you can fill the wallet with some initial funding coming from somewhere. So again, to me, this is a reference to Play here, where you actually get to seed some money into that, and you can start spending it or receiving it, right? So we can get some flow going just by introducing a simple wallet mechanism into the flow. And then you get into the third one, which is the social ledger as it is now, right? So you create the social objects, and they're somewhere located in a universal structure like collective and domain and the circle, which is connected to either a distributed hash table or some distributed database function that we have running in the back end.
I just want to mention that the funding may come from a sponsor, or you may say, okay, we have this project that's this big. We have 1,000 tokens, and we distribute them to the people in appreciation of their working on the project.
Mm-hmm.
But the Open Money API he's talking about does allow us to invent our own currencies for any purpose we want, which is just tokens to represent something. It's not really money.
Right.
But it could be.
Don't forget.
Specifically, I make the minor point, which is major, that they're not tokens in Open Money. They're measures, they're metrics, they're scales of relationship that bind the agents in their mutual status. A token carries no status. It is its own status. Abstraction point. Sorry. Carry on.
Thanks, Mike. But I do so the big difference is, besides authentication, I think this wallet piece is an important one for the social ledger, because that allows a lot of other things that are happening now here in actually using the ledger in your collective. So let's take a look at the collective. So here's, again, the top level here. You come into the social ledger. First thing you see is, let's say, hypothetically, 4 cards, right? So these 4 cards represent 4 collectives, right? So let's say here's the Holochain collective, here's the NuMap collective, here's DigLife, and here's RChain, right? So 4 collective. And this is as simple as saying this is a group of people coming together for a purpose, right? And you could click on the card and gives you some more information, let's say on the back side of the card, what the purpose, what the goal is of that particular collective, right? But here is where we can actually implement the first action that you can do using this wallet and this mechanism to say, there's some behavior built into the card. So let's say NuMap actually decides to say, well, yeah, you can join us, but we require 100 XYZ coins. Let me call it coins for now, right? Tokens. Something, 100 something. So this is kind of a membership fee, kind of an entrance ticket, right, into being now part of the NuMap community, right? And this is entirely up to the NewMap people to say, hey, we want to charge, say, 100 quid for joining us, right? Or it's free, up to them. Once you've done that, the interface changes because, again, there's intelligence built into the card that says, yes, you've paid your membership dues as an individual, right? And you can open it directly, right? So just click here and then you open it and get to see the next level of the social ledger. So that's one example of how we design an entry point into the social ledger coming from a collective level. If you dive down on a very lower level, the service request level here, this for me would be sort of the first cards you see now. Once you've established the collective, and once you've created some basic structure in that, say there's an operations domain, so you have that done. And you want to start a conversation now in communications. How do we set up our communications channel? So the first logical thing you would do, you pull up this Mattermost card, right? And it says here, not installed. So that means right now you have zero capacity to actually have a conversation, right? What I want to do with the social ledger too is to say, well, we provide you the means to establish that capacity. So you want to have a conversation? We think Mattermost is a good way to have a conversation, right? And all you would do is you would request an installation, right? So notice again, there's an action button here that says request, and there's a fee. There's some number associated with that to actually activate that request, right? A one-time thing that you would need. This is akin to, say, a user per user fee, but I'm not sure how much that plays into it. I don't want to say it's the same thing, but I think it's related to that concept. But again, you have a wallet now in that scenario, right? So maybe you have 1,000 quid in that wallet, and you can now say, okay, let me request access to Mattermost. So I can get into Mattermost. I suddenly have an account, and I can start have a conversation in Mattermost. So the role of the social ledger is to, again, enable certain technologies, right, that do things that help you move forward. And so the Mattermost card would be one of the first cards I see here. And for me, the task here is to figure out, okay, what can the card actually do? What kind of logic and what kind of behavior can we build into the card? And I already know, because of the Mattermost API that we've been using now, so what's possible here, right? So something like requesting an account and setting up a domain and adding a user to Mattermost is all doable, right? And ideally, Mattermost would also, the tool itself would authenticate you based on you as a user in social ledger, right? So I assume, Jim, this means there's a change on the Mattermost end to say, hey, that tool doesn't authenticate itself by using their own authentication mechanism, but uses ours, the one that we have, that we're using for all applications.
Yeah, what we're doing is aggregating the identities that are used, and we'll probably have a command to link them manually as well as they have with the Matterbox, the Holo integration. But as you collect these different identities, you have a Google ID, you have this Mattermost ID, you have this GitHub ID. We'll be aggregating those for the user, so that as they traverse this network, they'll log in or create an account if they're not already logged in. If they have a token, perhaps stored in the browser, encrypted, we can use that to log them on the target system. Let's say it goes to a GitHub project card or whatever.
Good, Jim. So this is just one aspect. How do you authenticate users against these different systems? But when you see these cards, the idea goes back into, so I'm a new user, I have no idea what Mattermost is. What are you guys talking here? Or what? I've never used Zoom before. Why would I use that? So to me, the social ledger needs to provide that kind of level of access to say, we suggest Zoom. You can click on this card and say, okay, Zoom is a video conferencing tool, face-to-face, real-time conversations. I see there's a need for that in our group. Let me install that. From zero knowledge on how do I install it, where is it, what does it cost me? I don't know anything about this. All boiled down into a single card that has enough intelligence to say, okay, I see you logged in, and I see you don't have an account with Zoom. Let me give you a way to set up an account and get started on Zoom, right? So it's really starting from scratch to see, give me a set of tools that you guys suggest are good enough for me to get our project off the ground. Yeah.
For starters here, we are looking to provide a Cloud Run instance where there's dozens of tools and lots of categories that people can install with one click.
Right, and Jim, to me, this is another question of the Cloud Run tool itself. Does that have an API that we can utilize to,
Absolutely.
Wow, that's cool. I love that. So this could be even more transparent, right? So we could say, a Mattermost is connected to a Cloud Run API that creates a whole new instance of Mattermost, for example, if you want to do that, through the logic on the card. So even less involvement of us. I was even thinking, that request could be initially a manual request. So someone gets an email, say to a Cloud Run administrator, that says, hey, user XYZ has just requested Mattermost, and we would step in there, just like what we do now, right, and set up a new domain for them, set up a new account, and they can get started. So it's not immediate, but it may take a day or so until they have that system set up, which to me is still realistic, because if you install Mattermost somewhere, it also takes some time to set it up. But the more we can automate that, of course, the better we're off with the social ledger.
Yeah, it's sort of like the first time you do a request, you document it. The second time you do a request, you automate it somewhat. And by the fifth time you get a request, you make a button to do it.
Right.
This screen reminds me of setting up an environment in AWS. And what I'm thinking of, if it's for novices, what you're explaining here could be done in, you remember Microsoft, in a wizard interface. So the next choices could be dependent on what your previous choice was. So if you've already selected Mattermost, you don't need another Slack type environment. So you go to the next stage.
Totally.
Think about it being as helpful as possible to the end user. A wizard interface or a step-by-step, does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And the way I wanted to use that here is the cards have intelligence built in. They know what you can do with the card at this stage here, right? So if you see this card the first time, it will only say request, right? And you can click somewhere like a wizard interface, and then it tells you, okay, what does that mean if you hit that button there, right? But the moment you do that, the state of the card changes, okay? Now it knows, oh, you've used it, you've created an account, so other functions become available to you, right? So it's all built into that set of cards that then suddenly appears. And then it goes, let me move on to the next one here. And then it moves on to, hey, now you've sort of unlocked the first level. That's where a little bit the gamification comes in, right? Here's a new set of cards that we would offer you, because now you've assembled your team, and maybe you created a Zoom account, you created a Mattermost account, you have conversations going on. Let me suggest to you some other ways of addressing issues that you might discuss in your workspace. So this is, you brought this up, John, Game Storming. That's a book that Dave Gray, a friend of mine, and some others wrote years ago. And it's a collection of sort of tools that you can use in a group setting, mostly in a physical setting, in a space, right, where you get together and have a drawing board and then get started on this stuff. But some of these, of course, are also useful in an online environment. So depending on where your team is, online, offline, you you can then say, okay, let me show some of the possibilities you have in that space, right? So some of the tools, I was just putting 4 of those in here, right? One is called Squigglebird. This is where you sort of scribble something and then you turn it into a bird. So it's like a very creative, play to get people thinking on new tracks and moving them into a different direction. Squid thing is a bit like finding the relationships and tracking back and back and back where ideas are coming from to the origins. The hero's journey, you probably heard that in the past, where do we start, and then where does the journey begin, and then what transformation is happening on the journey, as a pattern of to say, hey, we are going through a journey here in our project. Let's map it according to sort of a hero's journey, or a cost-benefit thingy where he's using sticky nodes on a wall and rearranging them to come to a grid that lays out the cost benefits and kind of prioritizes things. So these are all tools really to help you think through some of the problems. And again, the social ledger can be an enabler for these tools, right? We can bring in some of Dave's great thinking here on these collaborative sessions that he's created in the past, and map them into a simple card that you can pull up, and then it gives you some instructions and it gives you some other information that you need in order to play that, right?
Yeah, let me just mention that you have a perspective on the card within a context, and the actions that you can choose are part of the state of the card, in that you add an action and an associated webhook or bot call with certain arguments that endow the card with behavior from your context or the activity or the team, whatever, in sort of a user-centric view on the card out to the world.
Yep. Right, Jim. And one more for Michael here, then we're actually coming to the end of the hour here, end of this session. Here's how I want to bring in the wallet and the notion of a double ledger accounting process into the social ledger. So let's say here's a Zoom card, right? And it is created by a developer sometime, right? And he would ask for 1,000 coins, whatever it is, to actually use this card, right? And say you're a project lead and you see there's a value in setting up Zoom sessions, right? So I'm willing to spend that amount, and that goes to the benefit of the developer, right? So he's kind of the original creator, gets 1,000 and minus 1,000 for the initiator. So a project lead in this case who really wants to set up a Zoom capability for his team, her team. And then there could be one step more to set up the Zoom session itself, per session if the developer decides to do so, right? So again, would go back to the originator. But then you see, let's say I want people to participate in my Zoom session, and I would offer 100 kind of a reward or a token of reward to say, you participate here, or the value would create is worth 100 to me. So you see two contributors here, participate in the Zoom session, and they would activate that card. They see their own card, right? And that 200 would now go onto the account of the initiator, right? So he would say, yes, this is worth another 200 for me to have these two people participating in the Zoom session. And this can go on and on and on. And even beyond the Zoom session, so the thinking here is, let's say I finished the Zoom session, there's some good content coming out of this, and I want some viewers to see that. And in order for them to see it, they might have to submit 100 coins just to watch the video, hypothetically. And then this 100 coin would again, this is a double ledger entry. So it would go back to the owner of this new card now, which is the initiator, who said, okay, I want to start a Zoom session here. So all of these interactions, to me, it's like a flow that you create, a circular flow, right? Because it goes back and forth, and it's just a matter of adding more to one, and then someone gains, someone spends some more of that, and you see how these flows actually start to circulate just because we're using one of these cards here. So I'll stop here. That's my thinking where I want to go with this so far. There are some architectural slides here. We're at the end of the session. There's another meeting coming up right now, actually. So maybe we have another call. I'm not sure this week, but certainly after the new year, to discuss some of the architectural implications of this. Because I do think there's some foundational pieces that fit very well together in a decentralized environment, meaning the way almost like we have it now, and in a distributed environment that we can see later. Okay, I'll stop here because we're having new people coming in for the next session here. Let me stop the recording.